Hi guys, welcome back. So today I want to take a closer look at 3 story crafting tools that I got from this fantastic book, The Anatomy of Story by John Truby. For a while now I've been itching to get more systematic with how I use the story knowledge that I get from different resources, especially writing books. So I kind of have this whole bunch of them, right? And aside from really looking through them the first time I got them or remembering something random here and there and going back for it, I don't really make use of them. So that's why I want to make this a bit of an ongoing series, at least until I'm through with the ones that I already have, and really look at the tools in them and the techniques in them, highlight my favorite ones, and also make it more of a categorization thing of, if you have like a writing problem, what tool is available to solve it and which of these books basically provides tools for it. The video series is all about discovering new techniques and giving recommendations on my favorites that we'll find in these books, and on my website I am basically putting the whole categorization stuff there so that when you are looking for, you have a problem with how to plot your story, what tools are available, you can go to plot and then there or the tools listed from the books that I've read so far. So that's kind of like my idea here. And like I said, today we are starting with basically an old classic, which is originally a screenwriting book, but obviously it's all about story, so it works for novels just as well. So the first tool that I want to look at from The Anatomy of Story is actually a process. It's the first process that you would do when you work through the book, and it's basically the 10-step process on how to develop your premise. So it's a tool for figuring out your story idea and build it into the premise that you can work with before you get started with character and plotting and setting and all that stuff. And the reason why I'm a really big fan of this process is because the 10 steps that it involves are very focused on basically taking apart your idea, fleshing it out in a way that is applicable to then writing it. So for example, there is step 3, which is all about figuring out inherent problems in your premise. Take your idea. So for example, I have the idea of I want to tell a chosen one story from the perspective of a side character. What are all the problems that are going to come up when trying to write that kind of story, right? And for example, one problem would be the classical chosen one problem, which is, why is there only one person who can do a certain thing or save the world, right? So kind of like that's an inherent problem in the plot that seems very implausible and that you have to work around to make it believable or at least enjoyable for the reader. So that's one thing. Another thing specific would be if you want to tell a chosen one story from the perspective of a side character, doesn't that mean that basically the main story that would usually be the most interesting story gets told in fragments because this side character doesn't have all the insights, and how do you work against that? The whole idea with this step is identify these problems now at the stage where you can work them into the premise and make them a feature rather than a book 600 pages down the line when you have a lot riding on this plot point working out, right? So that's why I am such a big fan of this process. I've never come across a tool like this that focuses so much on developing the premise the same way that other tools do on developing character or plot. Then the second tool is also a technique more, which is about the 4-corner opposition. So it's about basically, you have your protagonist, you have your antagonist, and they have conflict, right? And the idea is to make it a more layered conflict and to look at different aspects of the different moralities, clashing with each other. Don't just have like this one conflict, have like 4 conflicts ongoing. So you have your hero in one corner and you have 3 opponents, 3 antagonists in the other corners, and all of them attack a certain weak point of the hero. And they all play into this overall conflict, this overall theme, moral, right? But it's basically, for example, the main antagonist would be someone who wants harm for the hero, right? And who directly challenges their belief. But a secondary antagonist might be actually an ally who just has a different viewpoint on the hero's morality, or has experienced the same thing as the hero is experiencing now and is further along and challenges the hero not to make the same mistakes that they made, right? So it's really all about basically looking at your conflict in tie with the theme that you want to explore and the morality, and figuring out the different aspects to it. And that gives it layers, it gives it moral gray zones, it makes it more interesting, more dynamic. And then finally, my favorite thing in this book is the whole reason why I bought this book in the first place. It's not as much a tool as it is a principle. It's the designing principle. So the designing principle is a sub-step in the premise development process that I mentioned earlier, but I want to highlight here especially because for me, this is something that made so much sense when I first heard it. The first time that I came across this designing principle was in a video from Lessons from the Screenplay, which cited this book as the source of that. And basically what the designing principle is this whole looking at not just what story you want to tell, but also how you want to tell it. So it's both those things are equally important. If we go back to the Lessons of the Screenplay video, he took the example of Searching, which is a movie that is about a father looking for his missing daughter, right? And that's the story, that's the what. What is the story? It's a father looking for his missing daughter. But how is it told? And that's the designing principle, how the story is told in a unique way. So in Searching, the designing principle is very distinct. It's basically what makes this movie unique and noticeable. It's this whole telling the story through the viewpoint of screens, of phone screens, computer screens. And that's what the designing principle is about. It's about figuring out unique ways in how you could tell the story. Are there ways that you could tell this story differently than it has been told before? So it could be have a unique viewpoint, tell it in a special tense. So for example, if you tell the story in the second person, that is also a designing principle, kind of like make the reader the protagonist, right? So all these kinds of unique ways of telling the story, that's what the designing principle is about, and that is why it is part of this premise process, where basically at the beginning, when you figure out what your story idea is, you also try to figure out what would be an interesting way for me to tell this story, or rather, what is the best way for me to tell this story so that what I want to highlight in the story, what I want to come out to better be shown through this designing principle. So yeah, those are my 3 favorite things in this book. I have to mention that there are a lot more tools in here. It's a very applicable book, so I would definitely recommend anyone who hasn't already read it to pick up your own copy and go through it, because it is really a book that seems to be all focused on giving you tools to apply stuff. And I mean, the story examples that are in here tend to be older movies, but they are the classics. Usually you would have seen them, and if you haven't seen them, you probably know enough about them to understand basically the lesson that is taught with them as the example. I didn't have any problems following any of them, even though a lot of them I haven't seen. And other than that, I will see you next time. Bye guys.